Charlotte in the Know, hosted by Adrian Biddle, reporting on influential people, news, entertainment, and events pertaining to the city of Charlotte and nationally. Okay, Charlotte, it's time to be in the know.
Let me give thanks to my sponsor, Urban Times, bringing the positive side to media. You can actually find Urban Times on Facebook with the search of Urban Times Media as well as Urban Times Magazine. And that's Times spelled Tymes. You can also follow them on Twitter at Urban T Mag, Urban T Mag, as well as on YouTube at Urban Times Media. You can also follow prior podcasts that I previously posted on YouTube with the search of Charlotte in the Know, as well as SoundCloud with the search of Charlotte in the Know. Hello, today I'm being joined by Professor Brian Magi, a professor of atmospheric science at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and we'll be exploring the effects of climate change. I got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
All right. What led you into your current profession, sir?
Well, let's see. I guess a general interest in science. I mean, I think I've always gravitated towards that, and I think you pick up on this when you're in school, and you find that over time I found that science made a lot of sense for how I saw the world, and in terms of evidence-based inquiry, and I just thought that was a powerful way to envision how we as individuals can contribute to a global collective, and whether that's even a collective at any scale, like whether it's a neighborhood or a city or a state or something bigger than that. And I think that science somehow embodies that for me, and so I've been studying this for a long time, many different degrees, and so as a result of all that time that I invested in, finally, you get to a point where you're able to contribute directly to teaching and research at a university, and so I'm very happy to be where I am.
Excellent. How long have you been at the University of Charlotte?
Yeah, I've been at UNC Charlotte for since 2011, so about 5-6 years now.
Perfect. All right. Now, the main topic of this is talking about global warming again, and one of my first questions that I have for you is, in your own opinion, what is global warming?
Well, it's even beyond my opinion, we can actually go right to scientific evidence, and
Yes, sir.
This is the work. First of all, like when you think of global warming, it's one aspect of a changing climate.
Yes, sir.
It's the one that we as individuals, like you and I, walking outside on a daily basis, maybe don't feel, but every year you end up seeing, kind of sensing that things are changing, and when you put the data to the feeling that you have, it's absolutely clear that the temperature of the entire planet is increasing, and the planet's huge, of course. Most of us won't ever get to visit most of the world, right?
Yes.
In our lifetimes, and that's how big the planet is. And so global warming, is referring to something that is indicating that the entire planet is warming in response to a change, and we know what the change is, and we know it's human activities primarily. And this, when I say we, I'm talking about scientists that I work with, scientists that I don't work with, but that we all, again, coming back to that idea, we all contribute to a collective knowledge, right, about how the planet's changing. And we think that's important because what we found is that even at smaller scales, like climate changes that have happened, say like in Central America in the past sometime, they've completely upended civilizations that have been there. And now we're talking about not just Central America that's has a climate that's changing, but that the entire planet is changing, and we have 7.5 billion people with a B on this planet, and so all of a sudden this is where the idea that climate change is not just something we should be monitoring, but that we should be trying to prevent as much as possible, because it will certainly disrupt, or at least from this is what we don't know exactly, so this is where the opinion comes in about how we interpret these results. And in my interpretation and many other people's interpretation, disrupting the climate system could be extremely detrimental to civilization in general.
I see.
And so I'm concerned just from the personal side on that, on seeing that data.
Absolutely. So currently, are we seeing the effects of climate change? I turn on the news every day, and it kind of puts me in awe just seeing dramatic flooding in the Midwest, where they normally don't have that amount of flooding. Even down south in our region, in addition to up north, where you see feet of snow that I haven't actually recalled seeing anything like that in my lifetime. So are we currently experiencing some of those effects right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And many different scales too. Like when I say scales, I'm thinking, you think everything from your city all the way up to your country, and even beyond that, maybe to other countries that we sometimes visit or read about or whatever. So the short answer to that is absolutely, we're seeing more intense rain events. We're seeing differences in how weather patterns are playing out, because all the weather that happens, and it's going to continue to happen. We're still going to have cold days and warm days and hot days and really cold days, and all these things. But it's going to happen in a world that is a little bit warmer than it was 100 years ago. And a little bit warmer doesn't sound like much, but it's a big deal when it's the whole Earth that's a little bit warmer. It's not as big a deal if it's just, Charlotte that's a little bit warmer.
Absolutely. So touching on that as well, how could global warming actually affect North Carolina possibly geographically? With the, I guess, how we hear that the ice cap is melting. Could that affect the East Coast in any kind of way, our coastal cities?
Yeah, there's so one of the really neat parts about earth sciences in general, like if we just think of how all these different parts of the planet are sort of connected. One thing that I think about first is the atmosphere. That's what I study. But the atmosphere is just one piece that sort of connects everybody, and that's why I like studying it. But then it connects itself is in contact with the ground. It's in contact with the oceans. It's in contact with the mountains. It's in contact with the ice up north, and all this connectivity sort of translates into connections between those parts of the Earth system. And so it's not necessarily that we're going to go up and build a house in the Arctic and then realize that maybe we shouldn't have built there. It's more that there's connections between how weather plays out here relative to the changing conditions in the Arctic. And so you can produce, there's actually a really neat hypothesis and some good evidence that would back this up as well in the scientific community, that suggests that as the Arctic sea ice, summer sea ice continues to go almost to zero, which it's expected to do by mid-century, which is by itself is absolutely shocking. But then even that alone, scientists say, well, a scientist like me would say, well, doesn't that have an impact on other things like weather or something else like oceans? And so atmospheric scientists are putting, this is not my work, but other atmospheric scientists are collecting the evidence that we have and using simulations to try to figure out whether the observations are, or whether their models can figure out what the impacts will be. And they simulate that condition and they observe what's happening, and they put that evidence forward to try to understand, if you take out the Arctic sea ice in the summertime, does it have impacts on other parts of the world? And it turns out the eastern US and much of the US actually, is the weather pattern at least seems to be trending to more stagnant, in the sense that we'll have regimes where it'll be hot for a slightly longer amount of time than it would have been, say, 50 years ago. And so there's a system kind of behavior there where the whole weather system is changing in response to something that's happening far, far away from what you and I might ever experience.
Wow.
And so so there's definitely those kind of effects. And then even when you take out the Arctic and you focus just on, say, North Carolina or the Carolinas or Southeast USA, something much more kind of in our backyard, then you definitely will you're seeing sea level rise on coastal Carolina, for example, all up and down the mid-Atlantic coast of our country. And that sea level rise is certainly playing out in how, for example, the tourism industry is sort of thinking ahead, how insurance industry is thinking about whether those homes that are built on the Outer Banks should be insured. And of course, this was a big debate in North Carolina a couple of years ago, and it remains kind of a contentious issue because we're trying to predict what sea level rise will be, and so as a result, we're predicting something that is based on the oceans that will affect economics. And so immediately you will have some resistance, because then the question from anybody who's doing the economic side or the economy of that part of Carolina will say, how good are these results? And that's a really fair question, but you have to consider with respect to the scientists that are studying this as well. And in the end, we do trust expertise in a lot of the things that we do, whether it's a medical doctor or a lawyer, and in a lot of ways scientists are trying to convey their expertise through that kind of inquiry-based approach. And so coming back to the North Carolina, you have coastal sea level rise, you have storminess that happens more interior, the idea that you have not just more rainy events, but each rainy event that does happen will have more rain come out of it. And so this is what we think of in meteorology and weather as an increased intensity of rainfall events. And so every rainfall event, instead of dropping, say, a couple of inches of rain in a big rainstorm, which we'll still have, now that rainfall that may drop, say, 3 or 4 inches of rain, and suddenly there's billions of more gallons of water suddenly falling out of the sky, and the city has tons of impervious surface. So water managers and city managers have to think about this, and they are absolutely thinking about this. So
that is a scary prospect.
Yeah, it makes your mind whirl, I think, is what is so amazing about it.
Absolutely. And touching on the topic of economics and everything, agriculturally, this could actually impact the state as well. I know we are big producers of tobacco and other exports out of the state. With the possible increase of rain, can you see this actually impacting our state's economy as well?
I think so. I mean, this is something that land managers and the agricultural farming communities are all paying attention to, and it's in a lot of ways, this is where you take the numbers that you get from all these climate models that scientists like me like to study, and you try to put them into context with respect to different aspects and sectors of our economy, like the agriculture sector. And so, I don't know specifically like how it's hard for a scientist like me to say specifically how one farm might be, like a particular person's farm might be affected. But in general, you can expect that farmers are paying attention and they're really in tune with the weather, right? And in general, and because their livelihood depends on it. And what's generally happening is that the places where it's best to plant a certain type of crop, that those places are changing in response to the changing climate. And so a farmer that maybe is planting wheat, all of a sudden realize, I'm not sure how sensitive wheat is, so I'm just kind of giving an example.
Yes.
You can imagine that same farmer may have to think about whether wheat is really the most viable crop for given their climate, and they're absolutely paying attention, and and that's important. So.
Professor Magi, I apologize. Let me get your opinion on something. And this is the thing that I have the hardest time actually understanding, especially with the current administration that's in right now, the possible cuts with the EPA. Why is it, in your opinion, that you think that as far as global warming, it doesn't actually get the attention that it should?
Yeah, that's definitely a big question. From this, if it was just up to scientists that were studying the climate system, overwhelmingly I mean, the community agrees on really fundamental points. That certainly climate change is happening. Certainly humans are mostly responsible for the current climate change, and most people who think that's not a good thing for civilization, whether it's U.S. or whether it's the whole world or whatever. It's not a good thing. So, why does it not get the attention? Well, I think part of it is, in a lot of ways, it's where people live. There's been some really neat studies to see how people, especially like we just take the U.S., something that we're really familiar with,
Yes.
and people have moved around in the U.S. into places where at least the weather, the day-to-day weather, not the climate, but the day-to-day weather sort of is really nice. It
Yes.
basically comes down to, if global warming is going to make winters warmer in most of the U.S. where most of the people live, then is it really that big an issue on a day-to-day basis? And I find myself thinking even this past winter in North Carolina, where it seemed like, hey, this is pretty nice to have this weather. And it's hard to keep that kind of gigantic, oh wait, this is bad. This weather might be happening because the Earth is warming because we're putting more CO2 in because of all the burning that we're doing of fossil fuels. And it's hard to kind of keep that perspective and just keep that vigilance on an issue that seems not quite immediate until all of a sudden the storm comes in, like a hurricane that might not have been as strong as it was, say, 50 years ago. All of a sudden now your family or maybe you are impacted by a coastal hurricane that floods a city for weeks at a time, like happened with Hurricane Matthew. And it's not that Hurricane Matthew wouldn't have happened without climate change, if that makes sense. But and the studies are underway. This is a very recent phenomenon. So scientists are certainly studying and saying, how much did climate change impact the intensity of Hurricane Matthew's rainfall, which had dumped a lot of rain on South Carolina and North Carolina coast that caused that flooding for not just a few days, but weeks because of the river sheds kind of pouring water into the coastal communities. And so whole towns were inundated by water for a while. I think it's really fundamentally it's a hard problem to kind of completely not only wrap your head around because it's so multi-dimensional, but then also to keep your head wrapped around, right? I mean, because we still need to go get groceries and stuff. And, it's just at some point you need to put something aside and say, I've got to tuck my kids in, I've got to, get the groceries, I've got to go take the car in or something like that. And at some point your daily life kind of prevents you from really wrapping your head around just the scope of the problem. And so this is where we really need to rely on our leadership at all levels in the country to make sure that these policies are reflective of, I'd say, the science, but also it's not just scientists who think this anymore. Most of the U.S. is totally on board with this idea that the science is really pretty well established at this point.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. With the possible EPA cuts and everything that could possibly happen, how do you foresee it as far as, because I appreciate you and the other scientists as being as dedicated as what you are and keeping us up to date on what's going on. But with the impending cuts to the EPA, would this hurt y'all or impede you in doing, tests or forecasts or even studying more on the impact that this climate change is actually having on the planet?
Yeah, I think, if we look at the proposed budget from the president's office, then certainly I think most scientists would agree. And remember, scientists are both Republicans and Democrats.
Yes, sir.
And it's most scientists would agree, and many other people would agree. I think that these cuts seem like they would be. I don't want to use the word devastating, but if you pick like the EPA, which has something like a forecasted 30 to 40% budget cut or something, which even if it was 15% and half that, it's still, that's a big change from what EPA is mandated to do under laws that have been passed already. And so in order to supposedly dismantle the EPA, it would require, you'd have to dismantle laws that have been gone all the way through to the Supreme Court.
Yes, sir.
And in order to do that, the EPA needs staff to do that. And to me, and I think a lot of people, since pretty basic economics. I'm not an economist, but I can pretty much look at those and say that numbers are just not going to work. And so I think even indicating that this is something that's in their thinking about how science plays a role in the U.S. Is a bad sign to me. But it is a proposed budget, and I take a lot of heart that this proposed budget has gotten, it's gotten scrutinized and it's gotten roundly criticized. I haven't seen very much praise anywhere for this budget as a very well thought out budget, and I think in that regard we all know where the money is eventually has to come from is Congress.
Yes, sir.
And Congress, the EPA, sure, they do regulations, and so in some ways those are going to be they tend to be a little bit hotter topics in politics, but the regulations, if you look at them and you look at the skies over Charlotte and you look at the skies over North Carolina, I study air quality as well, and we don't have good air quality without the regulations that have been set in place for 40, it might be almost 50 years. It's approaching 50 years almost. This is 1970. We've had the Clean Air Act in place, and the Clean Air Act has spawned all sorts of regulations that industry has been totally fine with. I mean, they didn't like it when they were given the rules.
Yes.
But then, like you take Duke Energy in our state, and they responded to these rules, and they responded in a way that we look up and we can see on most days here in Charlotte, beautiful blue skies, Carolina blue, right? The idea that we can actually look up and see this. And I would hate to see that change. Partly, just on a personal level, I hate to see that change. Even if I wasn't studying. So I hope the proposed budget does not go through anything close to what was proposed. And I don't think that's a very political thing to say. I think at this point the numbers don't speak to a great and well thought out plan at this point, and it's unfortunate.
Absolutely. Well, if there was I'm gonna pose this question to you, and just to see what we can do as citizens on our part to actually, hopefully, make some type of impact. What can we do as far as on our end as citizens of Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, and nationally, to help with actually curbing global warming, if it is such a thing, as far as being able to affect it right now? Is it something that we can do on our part to actually help with that?
Yeah, I think there's some really beautiful momentum that's happening. I think one of the fundamental causes of today's climate change and the global warming that we're experiencing is the burning of fossil fuels, and so transitioning away from from oil and coal and natural gas, as I'm saying this as a scientist.
Yes, sir.
It's not an easy. I know this is not easy, but we are making this transition. North Carolina is something like the fourth biggest in solar installations in the country, and not many people know that.
I didn't know that.
I mean, and what's really remarkable, if you've got your neighbors and friends that live in Virginia or South Carolina, is how little solar those states have. And you know that the reason this is, when you look at a map, and you can actually, it's remarkable.
Yes.
And the reason is because North Carolina gave solar incentives, the solar companies incentives to build large-scale solar all throughout the state for about 3 or 4 years. I think the incentives expired last year. But that promoted, it gave solar just a little bit more of a kickstart to say, well, we can try this. And it took off, and it's taking off in all over the world. And so, I mean, we in North Carolina, we have tremendous solar resources. We just look up and we see the sun every day. Absolutely. And the same is true in Virginia and South Carolina. It's just that their politics hasn't allowed for solar to get those incentives and get that little boost that North Carolina gave. So we get to be number 4 in the country in solar, while Virginia and South Carolina are nearly bottom. And it's there's plenty of sunshine there.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully.
And then there's wind resources as well. So North Carolina has offshore wind resources, meaning that there's what I mean by that is there's a tremendous amount of wind that blows along the outer, just off the outer banks and over the ocean.
Yes, sir.
And so there's a lot of thought about building wind farms essentially out I don't know how far, maybe you say 10 something miles or so off the coast. And that energy would just be churning day and night as the wind blows, and it will continue to blow all the time, just like the sun continues to shine all day. And so we have two really great ways that North Carolinians can contribute to a solution, right? Basically the renewable energies argument.
I see.
And I think we just, as individuals, and I'm learning this right now, how important it is to say and think about this. But as individuals, I think we all just want to make sure we step forward and think about what our legacy will be for when we look at our family or friends that have kids or whatever. Can we speak up as individuals and say, this what we're doing right now is no longer acceptable, and can we speak up to the right people? And the right people, of course, are the elected officials. Both sides of the aisle.
Yes, sir.
Everybody in this country loves renewables. When you ask people in this country, everywhere in the country, do you support the research into renewable energy? They all say yes. It's something like 80-90% of the country agrees. We love this stuff. I mean, we love the idea that we don't have a smokestack just spitting out plumes of smoke.
Absolutely.
I mean, and it's it's not like they're the enemy, because we get a lot from that. We got a lot from that. We are where we are because we were burning fossil fuels for 100 years, and it was cheap and it was pretty easy. But it's time to make that transition. And I think North Carolina can make a really big dent in that transition by acting as a leader in renewable energies. And we're already a leader in solar, and I think we can do it with wind as well. So I think just talking with your elected officials, building these relationships that maybe a lot of us kind of just, it's again sort of you've got so many things to do type of thing with your life. And this is true for me too. I'm speaking from personal experience here. Just that you just have to do other stuff, and sometimes you forget that it's important to talk and have a relationship with these people that are making decisions.
This is true. And like you said, we only have one world, and only get one shot at this.
Yeah.
And I noticed you talked about your kids as well as I was doing as well in email. And like you said, piggybacking off of what you were just now talking about, leaving a legacy. If we go on the course that we're going right now, what, and like I said, this is a hypothesis. What would you say the Earth would look like 100 years from now if we stayed the course that we're going? And I don't know how bleak this could be or what, but if so, I want to make sure everybody knows the importance of actually doing what we can right now in order to try to change the course that we're on.
Yeah, there is, when you start to put the science down on it, and you start to look to the way that scientists kind of build an answer to that question is by looking into Earth's past. And we know, for example, like ice ages have happened over the last million years on Earth, and none of us were alive. No humans were even anything close to what we are now a million years ago. So the Earth was a very different place. But during that million-year period, the Earth would cycle between ice ages and warm periods. And the ice ages were pretty long in terms of time. They'd last hundreds of thousands of years, something like that. And then the warmer periods lasted for a little shorter. They were more like 10,000 years. And that's still, all that is really long for a single human.
Yes.
But what scientists have done is tried to figure out the answer to your question, like what path, what are we really doing? Like, is this, how serious is this? And the seriousness is when you start to look at those past climates and realize how powerful it is to change the fundamental chemistry of the atmosphere by adding carbon dioxide and other gases as well. But carbon dioxide is still easily the most important greenhouse gas in terms of changing climate. And by adding carbon dioxide, it doesn't just leave the atmosphere after a few years. A pretty big fraction of what we add right now, like on a daily basis, even like if you just take your car, which emits a lot of carbon dioxide, and some fraction of that carbon dioxide that you emit from your car tailpipe into the atmosphere, maybe say 20% of it will be in the atmosphere for thousands of years, and so we're, big fraction is going to be removed by the oceans and land, all the things that breathe carbon dioxide essentially, and so we have that, and they've buffered some of the change. They've kind of mitigated some of the change that we've been trying to impose with all this stuff that we do. And So the concern that I have as a scientist who looks at this a lot, and this is where my students end up going with me on a journey in a class, where we walk to that point and they say, this is why it's urgent, is because we can't necessarily go back completely to the way it was. We can go back, we can stop it from getting too different, is the big key. And if it gets, when I'm saying too different, I'm talking about an Earth that is not just a couple degrees Fahrenheit warmer than was 100 years ago, which by itself is already causing all these things that we're seeing.
Yes.
Right? Or we can attribute some of that change to it. Bigger rainfall, maybe more intense storms, longer heat waves and cold waves, all these different things. But this is just with a couple of degrees warming. And if we went on the path that we are traveling right now, and we just burned all the coal, burned all the natural gas that we could find, and we could do it because we're smart. And if we did all that, we would be in an Earth that is something like 12 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer on average, the whole planet. Right now, we've only got about 2.5, something like that.
And that's been a big difference.
Yeah, and that scientists run out of explanations at that point. We have not seen an Earth that warm, that fast. And when I'm saying fast, I'm saying geologically warming that quickly. We don't have an analog. We don't have a way to kind of say this is what we can expect. But most of us will say in the science community that that's not where we want to be. And we can mitigate that change. We can minimize how much the Earth changes. It's going to change. It's already changing.
Yes.
And we can't go back from some of this, but we can make sure that it doesn't get too crazy. And if it gets too crazy, I really don't know what the Earth will look like. I don't think that's where we're going to go, because I think at some point everyone's going to start. The majority of people are going to say, "This is not okay. This is not what we want to happen. This is not what I want." I don't want to look at my kids and think about what they're going to have to struggle through, or think about their kids or something like that.
Definitely a scary thought. And you said through your explanation just now, you said some of the things that breathe actually help mitigate what's going into the atmosphere. So planting trees, for instance, will help, and hopefully reaching out to representatives and everything as far as I guess things that's going on even in other countries as far as cutting down rainforests and things of that nature. I know that probably is impacting it as well.
But even something like thinking kind of like at the in your home kind of thing, it's, and I think about this a lot, I think at the very least you can turn off lights, right? I mean, you can start with the old-fashioned turn off the lights when you leave the room, and that what you're doing when you think about the whole, you're saving energy, you're saving a few dollars or whatever every year, which is great, because then if you turn off all the lights, you save, enough to get another dinner out or something like that. So, that's what you're doing, is you're not using as much energy for just a little bit. And so as a result, our energy companies don't have to burn as much natural gas. Most of the energy companies in our neck of the woods burn natural gas. And so that means there's a little less carbon dioxide coming out of that power plant for that time.
Very good point.
Or if you're planting trees, those trees will, as they're growing especially, there's really good evidence that they'll suck up a lot of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere and turn it into the tree that we see, right? They'll convert it through photosynthesis.
Absolutely.
And that's a big plus. And we have, in Charlotte, we have, take great pride in like something like we have aimed for a 50% tree cover in our city. We're the city of trees, right? So, and we've got that ability to have these trees growing all over the place, and we can do that in our yard.
Absolutely.
You can drive a little less, take public transport, for example. So we have the Blue Line going up here near the university, and students are excited, and I think a lot of faculty and staff are excited as well. So we can live in different places that allow us to just take a street train in rather than trucking it in on one of the interstates.
Great point.
So all these are these small changes that we do have, if it's not you that's going to change it, but if all of us do it, if we start doing that collectively and start just saying, this is how, like when you walk out of a room, if you're in somebody else's house, you turn off the lights.
Absolutely.
You just kind of get used to doing it because
Very
that's
great
the right
point.
thing to do. So it's, you don't, even if you don't have time to contact your representatives, at least, your own
Do your own
personal
part.
practices can actually help.
Absolutely.
When you're using just a little less carbon into the atmosphere. And so a little less carbon that somebody 1,000 years from now is going to have to deal with in some way.
Great point. Great point. Now, Professor Magi,
Yes.
this is a little off topic, but still not too far off topic. This was a question that just happened to pop in my head off of seeing something on TV not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and you have to forgive me because I'm still learning as I go with some of this information that I'm actually learning about. But I was made aware watching this documentary is that it's almost like a in the ocean, for instance, it's this some type of warming current that runs from the East Coast down to, I guess, close to the equator and back up again towards the Arctic and back down. Now, and I don't know how true this is, and this is just another perspective that had me thinking about it when I heard it, but they were saying something to the extent of with the ice sheets melting and it's actually putting fresh water and it's actually back into the ocean and it's actually mixing with the salt water. This could actually, I guess, affect that warming effect of that current that runs down the East Coast and back to the equator. What kind of effect could that actually have on the climate? Could they actually?
That is it's been a really interesting area of scientific study. It actually that's the shutdown of what they think of as what oceanographers call the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC or AMOC.
Okay.
And sometimes they call it the thermohaline circulation, which thermo means temperature and haline means saltiness. So salty water, that if you change temperature and the saltiness of the water, then it changes density, and so it moves up and down in the water column. So you get the oceans are another whole area of study, of course. And what's really neat is how there's conveyor belts of water that sort of move throughout the oceans at all different levels, kind of like we have in the atmosphere. It's absolutely hypnotic to think about.
Yes.
And so what you're talking about, I think, is along the eastern U.S. and North Carolina coast, the Gulf Stream is what gives us those wonderful warm waters all the way into September. It seems like even October sometimes.
Yeah.
Where we have warm waters just off the coast of the eastern seaboard, and that's the Gulf Stream current that participates. It's sort of the north moving current that travels to past the southern tip of Greenland and south of, I think, Iceland, and then towards England and the countries in Europe. And what gives Europe, even though it's much farther north than North Carolina, gives it pretty mild weather because the Gulf Stream participates in the conveyor of warm waters from the Caribbean all the way up to Europe. It's this huge conveyor belt of warm water. And so when you mention that the ice sheets are melting, so Greenland is the most prominent ice sheet. Is the second most prominent ice sheet in the world. The first one being Antarctica down the other side of the world. But Greenland is melting out pretty rapidly at certain parts, and that fresh water on paper it looks like if you put fresh water into pretty salty water, it has the potential to shut down some of that Gulf Stream current or that overturning circulation. And if you do that, it's not really clear how rapid that would be. Many oceanographers, I think, would say decades. It'd take a few decades to kind of completely shut this down, but decades is pretty fast in the world of humans.
Absolutely, yes.
And certainly in the world of geology. So the cautionary note there is that if you shut down something that brings warmth to a great big part of the world where a lot of people live, Europe and England and all this, it will have dramatic and relatively quick impacts on the climate. And this is not necessarily a global warming thing so much as a consequence of global warming because the ice was melting because of global warming. And so this is one of those things where you say, well, if that happens, then what happens to this? If this happens, then what happens? You start making these connections and saying and building hypotheses, just like a scientist would. You say, Do we have data that supports this? Do we have a way to simulate this in a model or a climate model or an ocean model? And so the short answer is it's not out of the realm of possibilities that this could happen. And scientists are especially oceanographers, are very closely watching data sets to make sure that if there's any sign that this is happening, and I haven't seen a lot of the research recently, but if there's sign that this circulation is going to shut down or that it's slowing down significantly, then they'll be alerted to it. I'm not sure there's much, you can't change the ocean, it's too big.
Absolutely.
But it's certainly at least knowing that it's going to happen is something that at least countries in other parts of the world can plan on. I don't know, it probably has effects all over the world, but it's in the realm of possibilities. It's what we think of as abrupt climate change, meaning that it happens relatively quickly. It's hard to find in the data from the past, so we don't have good analogs. But what you described is the fresh water is from the ice sheet melting is really the mechanism that could shut down or significantly slow down the Gulf Stream. So
that is wild. So it could drastically change the climate.
Yeah.
Drastically.
Yeah, or at least change climate in say Europe and maybe northern Africa. So and I'm not sure how many downstream effects it will be, because as soon as you change that weather, that has impacts all around the world, of course. That's a big chunk of land. So
that is absolutely a scary thought.
Yeah, there's all these little pieces that we don't, in climate science, we don't. It's like a system that we're kind of poking, like by putting all this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We just keep poking it, and we just we're not sure what kind of we know some things a lot. We know heat waves are going to be more common, for example, but there might be some things that we don't quite know about. And this is the like if we warm the Earth, say 10 degrees Fahrenheit, we have no idea at this point. Like, it's just kind of, we know it won't be good. That's about it. And it's partly because we're not sure how many doors we're opening by warming the Earth that much. And all the evidence from anthropology and archaeology says that civilizations do not react well to climate changes. And that's something that we want to avoid, I think, at all costs.
And that's the scary part, really, because when you start to think about just one aspect of weather, and you, like you were just now saying, maybe the climate increasing by a couple of degrees, it also has a domino effect on the other parts of the environment as well. And that's the scary part, because we don't, like you said, we don't really know what could actually happen if we go down this road.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we know a lot. It's just there's some parts like that circulation shutdown, and we're just not sure like how close we are to doing that. And if we're not sure, imagine England having to make an infrastructural change to how everybody in England lived in the world. And you take this with any country and say, okay, now you're going to have essentially permanent winter or something like that. And I mean, it changes how we build buildings, it changes how we design cities, and you can't just redesign a city. Like, think of New Orleans and how dramatically impacted it was by Katrina back in 2005. And it's still recovering. I mean, it's, there's gonna be a whole generation that grows up having remembered that, horrible tragedy.
yes.
And it was a natural, it was part of this, what we saw was a city that was devastated by a hurricane, and people that didn't live in New Orleans or don't know anybody in New Orleans would say, well, why don't they just pick up and move? And that's pretty unfair.
Easier said than done.
That's a lot. Yeah, easier said than done, right? You can't just pick up an entire city. And so that's what climate change is kind of imposing on not just one city, but multiple cities around the world and all of civilization. We're saying, sure, we probably are clever enough to adapt to changes, especially in the U.S., where we do have, the infrastructure, the know-how, the research, all these things. But most countries in the world are not like the U.S. You take even something like, you take the level of poverty in the world and compare it to the level of poverty in the U.S., and it's a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely.
Most parts of the world cannot just pick up and move.
Not at all.
And that's it becomes almost a much more powerful ethical issue at that point. And if the U.S. is one of the biggest contributors to climate change, which it is,
And
there's
China.
a responsibility there.
Yes.
I mean, it's China, U.S., and Europe. I mean, it's that's why we as scientists ask our leaders to step up and respond to the research that we have been doing for 50 years, and I mean, not me personally, but collectively, that 50 years of really good research goes arguably back even farther than that. At some point, we need to say, okay, this is what the research says, and regardless of whether we like the results, we do need to kind of start thinking about what it means to be sharing a space with people all around the world. And
absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that we have to go there. It just means that we have to remember that those are human beings too.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right with that.
So it's a bit mind-boggling as a scientist to think that we can stall on this, but
it is.
But and it's a big issue too. So to be fair,
well, you certainly opened up my eyes a little further about what we are dealing with right now and the potential if we continue on this particular course. And I appreciate you taking out the time to actually meet with me actually to discuss some of these issues as well.
I'm happy to do it. It's a real pleasure to talk about it. It's not a topic that's really bright and happy, but that being said, there's a lot of optimism, I think, in the community that we are moving towards a different future that is better.
I certainly hope so. That's why I said I wanted to actually bring this particular topic out to the citizens of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, because right now, like I said, we appreciate your dedication in the science world as well and what you actually bring to the table. And the more I think that we actually educate everybody, I think the more effective it would be to actually get in the ears of our representatives to actually step forward and actually do what's right for this planet.
I think so. Well said.
All right. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.